Whether it's a hot time in Florida or a rainy night in Georgia,
looking for trouble?
It's the perfect time for the TCBcast, an unofficial Elvis fan podcast.
Oh, yes, sir. Good to see you go from. This glad fix to bring you the hottest thing in the country, real hot and blue, coming to WHBQ in Memphis, Tennessee.
I've loved him for 9 years.
For you to go.
Oh, no.
Yes, we're different. We're the fire.
I've got to please the crowd, excite them, make them happy.
Elvis, as you may never see him again, as the legend of Elvis continues to grow.
So yeah, Bridge Over Troubled Water. So yeah, what do you think, Gurdip?
Oh, great performance. I always love this song. And I gotta say, that dark blue suit, that's my
Is that the owl suit?
I don't know, what do you call it? I'm not into like suits. I just know like color wise. That looks great.
Does that pop as well?
And the
Does
red
it
suit. That and the red suit I think are the best suits in this film.
Right.
Followed by the red and then the baby blue, which I don't think it just goes with his complexion. I think the dark blue and red are that's where it's at.
Wow, you ranked the jumpsuits, Gurdip.
I did. Well, what would you say? Would you agree with me or no?
I don't know. Like, I don't really have a view on the jumpsuits in the sense that I didn't really rank them.
Like what's pleasing to the eye, no?
I liked the owl one, and the only way I know it's the owl one is because he actually points out that his belt has got an owl on it.
Well, which color is that?
It's the blue one.
This dark blue one, is that it?
Mm-hmm.
No, it's sort of. Is it the dark blue one, Justin? Yeah, it is kind of like it's sort of like a bit lighter than the navy blue, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in terms of Bridge Over Troubled Water, I think the standout performance really is that's the way it is. But it's a good performance.
Yeah, and then, of course, he has the lights turned up in the stadium. And Gurdip and I, we've talked about this before, about how in his 70s shows when he would do For the Good Times, this was one of his traditions. He does this at the Madison Square Garden show, and he was known to do it, throughout the 70s. And I love that he, as an entertainer, would do this to acknowledge, his audience and his fans.
Nice touch.
Yeah, it's the showman in Elvis really coming out.
It's funny because I can't see you really. I can only see like the first row here. There's a lot of folks out there, boy. I'll tell you. And up there too, there's a lot of folks. Well, hello there. My, it's been a long time.
Have you noticed that he throws something into the audience at one point?
Yeah.
Because
what?
Yeah, it's well, I've read in a couple of places that he throws a ring out to the audience.
It's small. I could imagine him just kind of slipping one off and chucking it out there.
So it's about the 1 hour mark, but then I did check out, like I rewinded and checked how many rings he had on his finger, of which there were a lot, earlier on in that concert. And I can't see that he removed a ring, so who knows? It's a bit of a mystery. But if any of our listeners can clear that up for me, that would be fantastic.
Maybe one of our listeners was there.
Maybe.
Is that possible?
Maybe. We do see, I love the fan-made sign, the Virginia is made for Elvis lovers, because that's a reference to what at that time, like it's now like just a thing that's been a known quantity of the Virginia is for lovers of, various things. But at the time, that was a relatively new tourism campaign for the state of Virginia. I think it had only been like 2 or 3 years before that, that had been introduced as like this big push of like Virginia is for lovers of, the outdoors, or, they would slot in whatever, and so that's where they were tying in, like, this is our state slogan of like Virginia is for Elvis lovers.
Oh, I thought you meant Virginia is for lovers. I'm like, really? What is it? Is there something seductive in Virginia?
So, no, it's just as someone who's worked in tourism marketing and stuff, I recognize that was like it's Virginia's like big thing. So, yeah. And of course, lastly in this chain, before we get to another montage, we get the big showstopper of American Trilogy. And Charlie, pulling out that cape.
Yes.
Got to get it attached and ready for the big scene.
Yeah, you need a cape for this one, don't you? Isn't it? I just think this is one of the standout performances. It's just it's such a powerful, moving song anyway. But the vocal performance is just flawless. I think this is a perfect moment for me in the documentary.
Gurdip, what do you think? This one or Aloha?
I think so. I think this one. Just because, as I said, he's more with it in this.
Yeah.
This is the best way to hear this song is when you're actually seeing Elvis perform it, because otherwise it loses its whole effect, at least to me. And I've said that in the past. You can't really listen to this in your car or at home. You got to see Elvis singing this, and that's what really adds to the whole effect. And I thought this was great. This is excellent. Justin?
Beck, what do you think? Aloha or On Tour for American Trilogy?
Well, weirdly, I think the vocal performance in Aloha is better, but I just think this performance is sort of he's a bit stiff in Aloha, isn't he?
Yeah.
So I'd say vocally Aloha's better, but I prefer the kind of overall performance in this one. That's what I'd say. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm very much the same. I think I prefer watching this one to the Aloha one any day from a visual standpoint. Just as an entertaining piece of watching him do it. Yeah, definitely. And remembering that he's performing this in the South, and so when he does Dixie, there's a cheer that goes up in the audience that you don't get in Hawaii.
So
sure. There is, there's something to be said that the songs have different responses depending on where you're at, and he definitely knew that. So.
Oh, I wish I was in a land of cotton. Old times are all and not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away. Picture land. Thank you, fellas.
Yeah.
We get Mystery Train now during the montage?
Yes, and we see Vernon riding a horse in Graceland.
Again with the Vernon.
Another traveling montage. And this is a pretty extensive one.
Yeah, it's a long one, isn't it?
This one lasts, let's see, what is this? Almost 5-6 minutes.
You know what I was saying? I was thinking, strangely, I was like, Mystery Train's good, but they could have used Promised Land. And then I was like, wait. That wasn't recorded yet.
No, 73. Yeah.
Exactly. Swarms of fans hugging and kissing him. Let me ask you this. Why is there nary a black or brown face in the audience? Justin, what do you think? Because all you see is a sea of white.
That's true.
Well, yeah. It's the 70s. And, his core demographic in the 1970s was a little paler.
Interesting. Interesting. It was a majority of his fan base. Yeah. Would you say it was 90% white? Maybe even higher?
Yeah.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Well, I mean, also, you're going to this, he's performing in the South. You think a bunch of black people are going to show up to an Elvis Presley concert in the South?
Yeah, you're right.
And there's part of the montage showing some statues of Confederate figures in Richmond, Virginia.
Were your eyebrows raised, Justin?
I did a little digging. One of the statues is of Dr. Hunter McGuire, a pro-slavery Confederate surgeon who experimented on enslaved black people. Also featured in this montage are Confederate General Stonewall Jackson and Virginia Governor William Smith, who was a general in the Confederacy as well. Part of it, obviously, they're just showing famous landmarks from these communities, but thankfully the Stonewall Jackson statue was finally brought down in 2020. Unfortunately, from what I understand, the McGuire and Smith statues were up as of late 2021. There are plans to have state legislation to remove them, but as we were talking about, contrasting that and Dixie with Elvis, this montage doesn't sit as comfortably as the earlier ones, looking back on his career.
You want to play I Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog
Yes, sir.
tonight?
Yes, sir. I'm
Good.
good.
That was my favorite when you... I remember...
Broke the string.
Yeah.
Broke the whole thing.
That's all right. The girls down at the place just made it up just to have something unusual for you. You never played a guitar, they said, and they wanted you to have one. But I'll...
No, I played here several times.
You have?
Yes, sir. I was in Roanoke when I first started out.
Now, these little names are listed on...
We see Elvis meeting with a bunch of fans as he's supposed to be getting off in Roanoke, Virginia. They're all waiting for him at the airport. We see the mayor, Mayor Roy Weber, accepting donations from a fan to give to the Salvation Army. And he's got, apparently, this Mayor Roy Weber was a florist or had a floral shop personally, like it was his business. So he's the one, and his business were the ones that put together this guitar gift that gets given to Elvis on the plane. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it breaks, so clearly they didn't do a very good job.
I know.
No.
Shoddy material.
Yeah. And Elvis, like, you can tell, like, in the footage that he's, like, trying to be as nice as possible. But the look that he gives the camera where they catch him, where he's just like, oh, God. I gotta grin and bear it.
As soon as the guy stepped away, into the trash it went.
But he also got the key, didn't he? The key to the city.
Key to the city, yep. And I
Yeah.
did.
If he was a rock and roller, he would have smashed it in front of his face.
Yeah. There is a nice little conversation there because they talk about Elvis recalls having played there before, and Elvis doesn't need me to fact check his own memory, but I actually went back and checked. Yeah, in May 1955, May 18th, 1955, he did play at the American Legion Auditorium in Roanoke, Virginia, so touring with the Hank Snow Show. So yeah, he was recalling correctly that he had been there before. So we get one last bit of this montage with DJ George Klein, WHBQ, playing Suspicious Minds. So we hear audio of Suspicious Minds playing over footage of Graceland, and this is where we get, as you were talking about, Beck, Vernon riding one of the horses.
Yeah, random, but anyway.
So here's my question with this montage. It almost feels to me like this last section of the movie, once you get past American Trilogy, this whole part is kind of unnecessary. Like the pacing just feels off. Right. Like you have this great big climax with American Trilogy, and then it's so low key with this travel montage.
Right.
Yeah, no, I agree. And this is another moment where I thought that rather than having the Madison Square Garden kind of press conference clip, which, if anything, just highlights how unhealthy Elvis looked the rest of the time, and the Vernon riding the horse, is they could have done some kind of montage and used some of the audio from that audio they recorded, that interview that we've been talking about, Justin and Gurdip.
Yeah.
I agree with you. It's it's a strange one. It sort of falters here a little bit, doesn't it?
I mean, honestly, for my money, I think the whole last 20 minutes of this movie just kind of falls apart. Like it feels rushed. You know, like you could almost swap the last 20 minutes of this movie and put it back in the first third of the movie, and you wouldn't miss a beat.
No,
I think
would they should have ended
maybe
it.
flow better.
American Trilogy should
end
have
with
been
American
one of the
Trilogy.
last
Yeah, exactly. End on a high, because then we get just basically an oldies montage of a couple. We get I Got a Woman and Big Hunk of Love, which are okay, performances, but they're nothing special.
Yeah, I don't like how they kind of transition to Amen and I Got a Woman. I sort of feels like it takes the punch out of the song. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I do feel that I Got a Woman and Big Hunk of Love, they could have featured a bit earlier on, I think, in this documentary. I agree with you.
I got a woman. Well, what time could you be? Big Hunk of Love. Hey, baby, I ain't asking much of you. No, baby, I ain't asking much of you.
I mean, the one, standout of this whole last section is probably You Gave Me a Mountain, which would
I agree.
at the time would have been a new song because Aloha obviously hadn't aired yet. So,
Yeah.
I can see where they were going from. Maybe they thought that You Gave Me a Mountain was a stronger song than American Trilogy. I don't, to me, in retrospect, I'm going, you should have ended with American Trilogy, But what do you think, Gurdip?
Yeah, pretty much I parrot everything you guys said. I'm just like, yeah. And then they go on to a gospel, and I'm like, yawn. I gotta hear JD with his vocals.
Oh, really? The Sweet, Sweet Spirit?
No.
Because Elvis, doesn't sing here. It's just JD
I know.
and the stand.
Why do I care to hear them? I don't want to hear them. I care for Elvis.
The beauty of this Gurdip is it captures his reaction to it. Like he looks completely transported.
We already got that in the studio.
Oh, I know, but isn't that funny? Like I really, really love this moment. In the moment when he smiles when the tenor hits that really high note.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't mind this at all.
Without a doubt, we'll know that we have been revived when we shall see this
So if you could just watch a film of Elvis reacting to other songs, you'd be happy.
But this is a gospel song. We all know how important gospel was to him. Hey, we're actually giving our listeners a run for their money here, aren't we? We're actually having a bit of a,
back and forth, yeah.
Back and forth. This is good, Gurdip. Yeah, no, this one's got my vote. I like it.
Yawn.
I liked Sweet Sweet Spirit when I first watched it. Again, as I was mentioning, the last 20 minutes of this movie, once I've seen it once, then in subsequent watches, I'm like, yeah, I could skip over this.
Yeah, this is your skip.
See, Justin got my back.
I'll
get it back.
We get one more kind of oldie song where he goes back to Lloyd Price's Lottie Miss Claudie, which I appreciate that, like, I mean, they do show him doing some of his 50s songs here, but I just think that, almost to the climax of the movie, or what should be like the grand finale of the movie, and like the penultimate song that he performs in this movie is Lottie Miss Claudie, and is that really
not even the good version?
No, it's a really slow version, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, this is one of my favorite songs, but like when he did it in the 50s and 68, that was like, wow. This one just kind of pales in comparison to those. But I mean, it's still enjoyable, but it's not Elvis at the top of his game doing this song.
Yeah.
There are better versions, I think, out there for sure.
Way better. Yeah. And then finally, Justin, what do we get?
Yeah, well, of course. Ends with Can't Help Falling in Love. What's hilarious about this performance is that you have this one fan who's down in front, and she's like slamming her arms on the stage, trying to get Elvis's attention while he's like opening the cape and, trying his hardest not to look at her.
Yeah.
And this is
funny.
I'm glad that he doesn't reward that behavior, and she gets completely ignored. And,
oh, really? You were like, good.
Yeah. No, I was like, fuck you, lady. Because this is where I kind of, we have the end sequence to talk about as well. But this is where I kind of wanted to talk about this lady and the mentality of should this movie have been, at every opportunity more Elvis footage? Because that's where like the discourse is now, is like fans demanding, please release, well, actually, it's not even a please. It's give us all the on tour footage, saying give us exactly. And I feel like so much of that is tonally, like, I don't disagree with, like, yeah, make the ask, petition. I want to see some of that footage as well. There's some great stuff in there. But the way that the tone usually is like this lady slamming her fist on the stage trying to get Elvis's attention and like, gimme, 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 gimme. And that's where I get frustrated with fans who really demand that the footage be, you know, the unreleased footage from this film get put out. But that's just where I kind of say, and I've gotten in trouble saying that before, because we last year did an April Fool's joke where I was like, hey, Elvis on Tour is getting a big mega release coming out, you know, for the anniversary. And then, like, it was obviously an April Fool's joke, but so many people bought into it, and especially people who weren't familiar with the show. It got shared around on Facebook, and then somebody got really angry with us, like, you're mocking
Fuck you,
us,
Justin. I thought that was real.
Yeah, but it was like, you're mocking us for wanting this footage. And it's like, no, it's not quite a mocking. It was just like, you fell for the joke. You know, and this is how ravenous people can be about it, where they would fall for a joke like that from someone with no source whatsoever saying that, you know, a new release is coming out. I get wanting the footage, and I get wanting to see more of this, because I think somewhere in the raw elements of this movie is a really, really solid documentary, like a genuinely good documentary, like a concert tour film. But the pacing of this, especially these last 20 minutes, just convinces me, like, this is not the best film that it could have been, you know? So I get it.
Yeah.
What do you think, Gurdip?
I thought, I agree, but I mean, I do want to see the footage. So, but I'm not like one of the, you know, the fans who are demanding it. I'm like, if it comes out, cool. If it doesn't, I'm not going to be crying over here. Mm-hmm. I'm not like that lady. Although maybe I would be if I was like, when he starts asking people to request songs, I'd be like pounding the stage and saying, "Listen to me, listen to this. His latest flame, do it." Do it. And then I like him bursting and running to the car like he's on fire. Mm-hmm. And then we get that Elvis has left the building. That was interesting.
He does a Usain Bolt, doesn't he? Straight into the car, grabbed by 600 members of the Memphis Mafia. And I love how, and I love how the shot ends on that fan just extending her arms, and then the camera freezes. I really love how it sort of ends there.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And let me ask you, isn't it weird that it ends on memories? Because in hindsight, like at the end of this doc, they play memories, but since then, a lot of other films end with that after Elvis has died. So it's kind of weird.
Retrospectively becomes cliche.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the point is it's retrospectively. I think in 1972, when this was played, it probably was quite effective, and didn't feel old in the same way as it does to us. But I was racking my brains and thinking of another song they could end with, and I honestly couldn't think of one, so I had to settle for Memories.
What I like about this montage and having Memories is that this almost feels like it's, and if you're correct that Jerry Schilling was the person who edited this, like it's moments and memories among the band and the crew, you know, and that's really what it's reflecting. It's not memories for the fans, it's memories for us who were on this tour, you know. And I love the shots of like them on the Greyhound bus, you know, the background vocalists, and you see the Sweets and Kathy. And
I mean, I love that it was pulled together by Jerry Schilling, because he would have had an insight to the man that no one else had and no other editor could have had. And I think it's quite masterful that he ends with that kind of freeze frame shot of Elvis looking out the window, and he's kind of got his pensively. And I don't know if you picked up on this in the Baz Luhrmann trailer. You can actually see Austin replicating that at just very quickly in one quick shot. Yeah. But I love that shot because it's such a private moment. And whilst he could have been reflecting on what to have for dinner, it just kind of feels like it's such a private moment of a private man. And it leaves you kind of asking more questions, I think. I love that.
He was probably reflecting on that guitar floral arrangement thing and saying, what the hell was that? You know what they could have ended it on? I'll Be Back from Spin Out.
Really?
No.
Why not? It makes sense.
I don't think so. No.
Because he wasn't going to be back.
He's not going to play a song from one of his crappy movies.
No, that would be a hard no, Gurdip.
Very hard no. Elvis would have smacked you upside the head.
I'd love that. I could sue him.
But yeah, I mean, talking about, Beck, your thoughts on the montage there at the end and that final shot, and thinking about that look of, getting a glimpse behind the person, looking at the critiques that, film critics had at the time, like that was one of the handful of criticisms of the film, was that it didn't really let people in on the real Elvis the way they thought it was going to, and that it's still a little bit of a put on for the cameras. You do get bits of interviews with him, where he talks about, personal stuff, but not to the same extent that you would expect, if you went in really wanting to get under his skin, you don't really get that from this.
No, we don't get that deep look at his personal life or anything like that. I mean, we're getting what it's advertised, Elvis on Tour, no?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, define private though, Justin.
What I mean by that is that it's a difference between him talking more candidly about his career and the state of his career and the state of how he approaches things, any of the reservations that he has, and not just a surface level like, oh, I still have, stage fright, which, is a big thing for him to admit as this world famous star. But there's a difference between that and some of the very candid stuff that he turns in that interview, and I just feel like you can almost sense that, like, there's more under the surface here that's not being shown. You still walk out of this movie not really having an idea of who this guy is. You see aspects of who he is, but he's still sort of this mythological figure, the way that the filmmakers decided to depict him. They're painting this picture of Elvis as this larger-than-life figure. Still
a progression, and it's sort of, when you compare it to That's the Way It Is, we definitely, I think, get a bit more underneath the surface, I think, of Elvis with this one. But yeah, no, I get your point. I just wasn't sure when you talked about private whether you meant, they wanted to see him and eating dinner or...
Right.
I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, not necessarily like day-to-day, like, with his family or things like that. I don't think that that's what people were expecting going in. The film is Elvis on Tour, but you still don't really even get a sense of his creative process of how the show, and that's why they went to all this work of filming the studio sessions and filming the rehearsals, and they show bits of it, but they don't really like work through how the process of the tour came about. When you watch the special edition of That's the Way It Is, the new edit creates this narrative where you actually have a progression to, they start in rehearsals and then he's working through arrangements, and then he's combining, you see the backing vocalists rehearsing on their own and the band and Elvis doing their other thing, and then they merge that together on stage, and there's actually like a sense of progression to it in the special edition. And you just don't really get that in Elvis on Tour the way it was edited in 72. And to be fair, like, you don't get that, and That's the Way It Is, the original cut. But I just feel like somewhere in the raw elements of everything they shot, there's probably a narrative that could be constructed about, like, how did Elvis's show get constructed? What's the difference between what he takes out on the road and what he does in Vegas?
I wanted musicians that could play any type of music. Lead guitar players and bass, piano, who could play classical or anything, which those guys can. And all the musicians were all handpicked. I auditioned musicians for days and days, drummers, guitar players. Somebody said, I said, who's the best guitar player around? And they said, well, Glenn Campbell and James Burton. And I said, well, Campbell's out. He's on his own, so James Burton. But there's a lot of good men around. It's just a matter of finding them. But they all just fit in, and fortunately, they knew most of my songs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But maybe that was slightly deliberate as well, because I imagine they wanted to steer away from or steer clear of the formula of, that's the way it is. And I know that you said in the original edit of That's the Way It Is, there's less of the narrative around kind of prepping for the show, but you still get a sense of that, the rehearsals. You certainly see more of Elvis in rehearsals. So I don't know how much of that was deliberate on the part of the directors of On Tour to try not to replicate that. But I don't know, like if you were to ask me what my overall assessment was, I'm incredibly grateful that we have this, because I'm grateful for any footage that we have of Elvis performing. But it just doesn't seem to hang together, and I'm confused by the intent and I guess the objective of this documentary. And in many ways, it feels like a series of a selection of footage that's just been kind of pulled and glued together. So I have very mixed feelings about how effective this is as a documentary. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, especially that back portion of the movie where, like I said, it just, once you get past American Trilogy, it doesn't feel like the film is going anywhere.
Do you know what I would love to see? I mean, Steve Binder's for the 68 comeback special, he produced that book that kind of documents the process and the thinking. I would love, because I think that's what's lacking for me, is like I did a search. I tried to find some interviews with the directors to kind of understand what their thought process was, but also get a view on kind of their retrospective on what filming was like and perhaps what they would do differently. Like I feel like I don't have that. That's a big gap for me. And I would just love to see like a book or something, something that explains all that.
That's I think you nailed it. Like we just don't have, for as much as, I'm grateful to have the interviews that they gave, like with Peter Guralnick and things like that. It just doesn't feel like we have a clear idea of what they were really going for on a moment-to-moment basis. Like certainly we have big picture of, them talking about it years later and saying, this is what we really wanted to do. And this is the film that we had in mind. But to have them look at the film critically as a creative, say this is why we made this decision, and maybe it's there might be some meddling from Colonel Parker of going like, we're going to reshift the focus of this section of the movie or something. Like we don't know what that behind the scenes process was, of what was in and what was out, and what the debates were that they were having with each other.
But wouldn't it be great to know those though?
Yeah. So, but I mean, the film was successful in the sense that like it did win a Golden Globe. So critically, it was successful. Commercially, it was released in November, and apparently Colonel Parker had planned on doing Aloha from Hawaii around the same time, and MGM legitimately was like, we'll go head-to-head with you on this if you're going to try to... Like, why would people pay for a ticket to see a movie in theaters that they can get for free at home?
Yeah, it's fair enough, isn't it?
So, I think that, too, is another reason why maybe this one isn't as highly remembered in comparison to something like Aloha from Hawaii. Is that, like, it was almost immediately overshadowed by that TV special. And then in terms of the footage that's come out since, This Is Elvis obviously includes some additional footage, both the on-tour type stuff, and then there's a performance of Always on My Mind that's used there. The Lost Performances that came out on VHS and Laserdisc in the early 90s has All Shook Up, Teddy Bear, Don't Be Cruel, Are You Lonesome Tonight, I Can't Stop Loving You, How Great Thou Art, and Release Me. From the first several are from Hampton Roads, and then I think Release Me is the only Greensboro one that was on that.
Oh, please, release me, let me go. For I just don't love you anymore. To live a lie would bring Spain.
In 2010, when they had the Blu-ray coming out, the DVD, they did do a theatrical screening, and I remember them promoting that there was going to be previously unreleased footage that was screened at that at an in-theater event that they did, And then when it screened, I remember reading reports from fans that were disappointed because they went and then there wasn't any new footage.
False advertising.
So they sort of like falsely, advertised that there was going to be this new footage. And basically all that they had instead was this like talking head interview with like Jerry and Priscilla and stuff talking about the movie. Now, otherwise, quite a bit of footage has surfaced and been released on bootleg DVDs among fans, shared among private collectors. There's a lot of it out there. Some of it's out there on YouTube. Certainly, I've seen quite a bit of it. And, of course, there have been bootleg sets of a lot of the audio on top of, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, the official release of the on-tour rehearsals FTD. But even, like, RCA, BMG, Sony, they haven't released a lot of the audio from this over the years. They did release one full concert, which was the San Antonio concert, which was on the close-up box set. But other than that, there haven't been a lot of these that have come out.
No.
And
why do you think that is, Justin?
I think they were hoping that there would be something substantial from Warner Brothers in terms of like a visual release, but then like the Blu-ray and DVD kind of came and went without a box set, an audio component to that. And of course, we did have a couple performances that got kind of resurrected because HBO, put up the money to have a couple scenes brought in for The Searcher. A couple, I think Burning Love and I think Separate Ways ended up in The Searcher. And those were both from the Mock Studio session. So we got to see, a little bit there, and the audio got released on the soundtrack for that.
Like the sweet song of the fire, and you light my morning sky with burning love. With burning love. Burning love. Just a hunger, burning love. A hunger, burning love. A hunger.
It was a hard song for him to sing and to get into.
About them lyrics.
But overall, like the commercial presence of this movie hasn't been real great either. Do you think that has impacted how prominent this is in people's minds?
I think because this didn't get a real soundtrack, it's that lost treasure I think people are looking for. They're like, we didn't get the full package.
That's true. There was no album at the time.
No, I think that's why this is alluring to people, because it didn't have the full soundtrack. And then on top of that, we don't currently have all the footage that they shot.
Right.
So I think that's why people are so interested in this film specifically. It's like that lost or last bit of the puzzle that people want.
Yeah,
I think
and it's one of those last things that we have confirmation exists.
Yeah.
Elvis fans have been so lucky that we've gotten, the vaults have been scraped. The barrel, the bottom of the barrel has gone out, and we're now 30 feet below the barrel underground.
We're digging in the dirt.
And this is the only thing that we really know that for sure is out there in professional hands. We know that Warner Brothers in their archives has preserved this footage, that it was all transferred when they were, archiving things back when they were re-editing That's the Way It Is, and they were apparently potentially considering a special edition and then just decided not to.
Why do you think they haven't issued it?
I think part of it too is that the commercial viability is just not there now. Maybe. I mean,
FTDs, how commercial are those?
True. That's a really good point. FTD hasn't done, and from what I understand, they are, this year supposed to be putting out an on-tour box set and book by David English. But yeah, they haven't.
I find it terribly odd, I must say, because there is a market. Clearly there is a market, and you could argue that after Baz's movie comes out, there might be an even bigger market. Yeah. And, studios lose money on stuff all the time, and I feel like this is a risk worth taking, quite frankly.
So the last question that I kind of had, thinking along the lines of, because now people point to the Beatles Get Back, and what Peter Jackson did with that. Could something along the lines of that be made from EOT's kind of raw elements, considering the potential costs of restoring the footage and bringing it up to the level, you were talking back about how studios, throw away money on total crap, but do you think that there would be the potential for something like that in here, or was Get Back so particular because it was the Beatles, because it was trying to represent that footage in such a way that it clarified or corrected existing narratives? Like, would there be a story in this that would be worth telling, or is it just the novelty of, we got more Elvis footage in concert, is there something there?
Well, we can't really comment on that without having seen the footage. I mean, what I would love to see in terms of, footage that hasn't been released is, and I think you pointed to this, is footage of him rehearsing, footage of him in the studio, in the mock studio session, all of that. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I would say first is that it's hard to answer that without knowing what's out there. But wouldn't it be incredible to get Peter Jackson on that project? But saying that, I feel like it might have been easier to weave a narrative around Get Back in the way that he did than it would be to weave a narrative around, the kind of the footage that we haven't seen for On Tour, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There's just not that much there. Like, it's just Elvis doing a bunch of concerts, and
yeah,
doing some rehearsals in studio. There's nothing in the greater context of his career that this stuff tells us that we don't already know. It's not like we're having to, we're not going to find the smoking gun of, the Yoko, wasn't the person who broke up the Beatles. Like, I just don't think that there's anything like that for Elvis in this. So,
yeah, no, I agree.
But that's Elvis on tour, and it was interesting looking back. And what do you think? You guys will revisit this movie again anytime soon?
I probably watched it enough in the last week to last me a little while, but now that I know it better, I've got as I said earlier, I've got a more of an appreciation for it. But hand on heart, I probably would be watching other stuff before I watch this.
Yeah, probably just clips like I have been doing since '95. I don't know if I'd watch this from beginning to end again for a long time.
Cool. Well, that's it for Elvis on Tour, the 1972 documentary. Thank you to our Patreon supporters for voting on that. And without further ado, should we head on over to Song of the Week?
Let's do it.
Here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Elvis Presley. Well, get out of that kitchen and rattle those pots and pans.
What a night. Ooh, what a night it was. It really was such a night. Well, when Monday comes, she's Tuesday. When Tuesday comes, she's Wednesday. I'm wearing the heart of Rome. He talked and talked, and I heard him say, I know that you've been told it's not fair to tease. It's the edge of reality.
All right, so these are Song of the Weeks chosen by Patreon supporters. Is that right?
That's correct.
Justin?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
okay,
yours comes from Lorenzo.
Oh, thanks, Lorenzo, because the Song of the Week I'm covering is Mine, which is written by Sid Tepper and Roy Bennett.
Mine is a heart that beats for only you.
It's a beautiful track, but one that I think is imperfect, and I'll explain why in a little bit. There you go. I'm telling you how I feel about it straight up. So the writers, Tepper and Bennett, they were actually childhood friends, and they lived across the road from each other in Brooklyn, and they began writing together when they were 11. But didn't pursue it as a career till they hit 24. So they were writing together for a long, long time, and they were extremely prolific. Between 1940 and 1970, they had 300 songs published, so quite a few. And they've been recorded by a really broad array of artists. So we're talking everyone from Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Ray Charles, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Pat Moon. It's a long, long list. And in their early days, actually, the Beatles used to perform one of their songs that's called Glad All Over, which was recorded by Carl Perkins originally in 1957. And did you know they also wrote 3 of Cliff Richard's biggest hits, including Young Ones? Yeah. So I'm going to give you a bit of background on the duo because 42 of the 300 songs that Tepper Bennett wrote were recorded by Elvis, so quite a few. And most of these songs were written for Elvis movies. And in fact, their contributions were recognized by the Elvis Presley estate, and Lisa Marie Presley presented them with a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2002. So when it came to Elvis's movies, the way it worked, and Justin and Gurdip, correct me if I've got this wrong, was that the script for the movie would be sent to Freddie Binstock at the publishing company Hill and Range. And then Freddie would then go out to a selection of songwriters who would then go away and write the songs that fit with the storyline or lack of storyline later on in the 60s. And then they would then pitch these songs to Freddie, who would then shortlist a handful kind of for consideration. So Tepper and Bennett, they started submitting songs for Elvis as early as 1957, and one of them, Lonesome Cowboy, made it into Loving You, and they also got New Orleans into King Creole. And if you want to see the full list of 42 songs Elvis recorded, then there's actually a Tepper Bennett website out there, which is tepper-bennett.com, which lists all the tracks that Elvis recorded. So it spans GI Blues through to Stay Away Joe. And there are actually some quite strong ones on the list. They wrote over half the tracks on Blue Hawaii, including Beach Boy Blues, which is a personal favorite. But they also wrote
Song of the Shrimp. Awesome.
Yeah, I know. Well, I was just going to come to that because they also wrote Mexico, The Lady Loves Me, Angel, Take Me to the Fair, and Relax. But they did have a couple of off days, though, because they're responsible for Song of the Shrimp, Confidence, one of your favorites, Justin, and I Love Any One Girl, and Petunia, the Gardener's Daughter.
Now, hold on.
Wait, did you just say they were off? What?
Song of the Shrimp. Me and Gurdip love Song of the Shrimp.
That's an awesome song. What are you talking about?
Is that,
I think you're letting the earwax build up. What's going on?
Is that when you've had too many wines, Gurdip?
Not at all. This
sober,
is a lovely
totally
song.
Sober. It's an homage. It's an homage to a Harry Belafonte song called Jamaica Farewell.
Down at the market you can hear ladies cry out while on their heads they bear. Ackee rice, salt fish are nice, and the rum is fine any time of year. But I'm sad to say I'm on my way. Won't be back for many a day. My heart is down, my head is turning around. I had to leave a little girl in Kingston Town.
Goodbye, Mama Shrimp. Papa, shake my hand. Here come the shrimp boat for to take me to Louisiana. Here comes the shrimp boat for to take me to Louisiana.
Ah, okay, all right. Has this changed the way you feel about me, guys?
I mean, no.
We'll let it slide.
We're on par.
Because I don't like Song of the Shrimp. I am off. All right, so
I mean, you also say you don't like Never Been to Spain, so you're really not doing too well this episode.
But you need to respect that every Elvis fan likes different stuff, right?
Do you have to?
Okay, let me rephrase that. You should go deep. Respect the fact that Elvis fans like different stuff. That's what.
If Elvis fans don't like the stuff I like, they're pretty much dismissed.
Well, look, if any of our listeners feel very passionately about Song of the Shrimp, I would love to hear from you. So please let us know.
Well, passionately for or against, or both?
Well, both. Love to hear views on that.
Go on,
yeah,
sorry.
seriously.
I couldn't let that statement stand. I had to interject. I'm sorry. You can't just put that out there and not have me comment.
always
You can't
welcome
besmirch
the
Song of the Shrimp and expect me just to be quiet. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen.
Back and not
it's never going to happen. No. It can. It won't.
So some of the songs they wrote were non-movie tracks that Elvis recorded. So these include For the Millionth and the Last Time, which was recorded in 1961, but wasn't actually released until 1965. Mm-hmm. And another one of those is Western Union, which was recorded in 63, and it wasn't released until 68. And the fact that these tracks sat on the shelf for so long, I think, indicates probably how Elvis felt about them. But in terms of mine, it had been sitting around since 1965 when it was actually being considered for Paradise Hawaiian Style, but they chucked that out for This Is My Heaven. And mine is one in a series of ballads that they wrote for Elvis that, in my view, are just very much of the same ilk. So I'm talking about All That I Am, I Ready, and A Boy Like Me, A Girl Like You. And he recorded mine in September 1967 at Studio B in Nashville. And it was recorded at the same session he recorded Guitar Man and Big Boss Man and the brilliant You'll Never Walk Alone, which incidentally, I know this is really morbid, but that's going to be my funeral song. Like, I love that song.
Wait.
Yeah.
Again, you put these statements out there, then you want to move on. You picked your funeral song?
Yeah.
Why? Why have you done that?
Like,
you're not very old, unless you're like 90-something.
No, I'm not. I'm not actually. No, I'm not old. But I don't know. Like, I was sitting around with some friends that we went away with, and I think we'd definitely had a few too many wines, and we started talking about what our funeral songs would be. Wow. Yeah, I know. Quite bizarre, actually. Now
it's hilarious that I think Gurdip is just in denial about his own mortality, because I've had that conversation as well with my wife about
God.
Yeah, like
what's your song?
Well, obviously Roy Hamilton's "You'll Never Walk Alone."
Oh my God! So both of you are gonna pick the same song with different
maybe
artists.
We should have a joint funeral, Justin.
You know what?
Well, I mean, if we keep talking like this, Gurdip will make it that way.
I know.
I'm gonna play "I'll Be Back" at my funeral, so I don't know what you guys talking about.
Or "Song of the Shrimp"
from Spin Out. I'll be like, seriously, who approved this?
Mine is a heart that beats for only you. Mine is a love. God damn, man. Okay.
Okay, it's 4.
No.
Well, stepping away from the funeral songs, so I said that he recorded it at the same session as Guitar Man, Big Boss Man, and You'll Never Walk Alone, and he actually tackles mine straight after recording Guitar Man and Big Boss Man, and they're very different songs, and I think it's fair to say that this one just wasn't an easy one to record. He does 21 takes in total, which is a lot, and I know that he's, it's taken 30 plus takes to record other songs. I think was it Hound Dog or Don't Be Cruel it was over 30 for sure. But it's just that I'm not sure the final master actually does the song justice. So we do have some takes that have survived. Take 1 and 2 are false starts, and take 3 he gets most of the way through, but he makes a mistake and he emits a goddamn, and he sounds a bit annoyed, I have to say. Take 4, they get all the way through, but at the end of the take, Elvis asked to make a backing track so he can overdub his vocals. So I think he's sensing that the instrumentals and the vocal just aren't gelling at that point. 5 and 6 are false starts, but I assume they were instrumental only. I haven't actually listened to those ones. We don't have take 7, which will be an instrumental only, but by take 8, he decides to sing with the band again, but he actually forgets to tell Felton, so his mic is off, so they have to stop the take, and Elvis then jokes about producing an album of instrumentals.
For only.
You're gonna sing, Elvis?
Yeah.
Oh, I had your mic off. I'm sorry. My fault.
Oh, I should have told you.
We thought you was gonna try it.
Yeah.
Okay, this is 9. This is 9.
Whole album, man, instrumentals.
We then have take 9, which is a complete take, and his phrasing has progressed a little, but he gets the words wrong in the last verse, so that one's not going to work. And then we have take 13, where the instrumentals are sounding more together. And it's actually not a bad take from an instrumental perspective. And I almost feel like it was good enough for Elvis to overdub his vocal. And then they keep going until take 21, which is the master. And from what I can see from Keith Flynn's brilliant website, Elvis did overdub a vocal on this. But in my view, it's just an example of kind of the law of diminishing returns, because as I inferred earlier, I do feel the master is imperfect, but it's through no fault of the band or Elvis. I just think it was a really hard one to get right in terms of, getting the instrumentals to actually gel with the vocal. And so by take 21, his vocal has just got a slightly harder edge to it than the earlier takes. And he's bringing kind of more of an attack, which I think kind of, I don't want to say borders on aggressive, but it's certainly up the scale a little bit. And he's overemphasizing the beats in his vocal. And I think this is his way of trying to bring some rhythmic shape to the song and kind of keep up the momentum. But the result is a track, in my view, that just sounds quite labored. And so yeah, I mean, what do you think of the tracks?
Yeah, to me, it's not a very memorable song. It's kind of a snore fest. Elvis performs it well, I guess. He sings it well enough. I don't know. It's just, I think if he had recorded it maybe like in '69, I think we would have got something better. But just here, it's just kind of, I mean, I skip it. I'm sorry. It's just not something that I listen to. I don't know. What do you think, Justin?
Now, see, I actually really like the song. I mean, it's not one of my all-time favorites, but there is something about it, despite like intellectually recognizing that it's a fairly, pedestrian song from Bennett and Tepper, where they're, you could have slotted this into pretty much any movie that Elvis was in the mid 60s, with any of those kind of interchangeable ballads that aren't super specific, to any one love interest. So, they're written to be vague, and to be very, non-specific. And yet it does speak to, as we've talked about many times on the show, the fact that like Elvis could kind of sing the phone book and still make it work. And he elevates what's pretty blah material. And I find that, this is not, I don't know, it's frustrating because I've read some discourse on this song where people are like, super critical of it, where it's like, oh, it's, it's not a gem, it's not, anything like that. And like, to be fair, like that's true. Like, it's not like one that, you're going to go out and seek out every time, as like this underrated ballad that, nobody's paid attention to over the years. But it is a very sweet performance. And, Bennett and Tepper, like, they gave Elvis some good material. And I think, the fact that we can, they did give him some good songs, we can give him a pass on this one.
Beyond the end of time, I will be your love. Promise you'll be mine.
Yeah, and I think you hit it on the nail on the head there, Justin. Like, he just gives it a bloody good shot, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And I agree with what you've just said. So it was one of the tracks that was put on the Speedway album, released in May 1968 to bulk up the album, really. And it was actually one of 3 Tepper Bennett tracks on the album, and the other 2 were Western Union and 5 Sleepy Heads. And the album, it didn't do very well at all. Like, it peaked at 82 on the Billboard 100, and it only sold 100,000 copies on release. But talking albums, in 2002, BMG released a compilation of Tepper Bennett songs that Elvis recorded, and apparently it's a collector's item. I don't know if you've got it, Justin, in your collection.
I'm familiar with, because they had a couple. They did a Elvis Sings Lieber Stoller, and then they did a Elvis Sings Tepper and Bennett. So,
yeah.
But yeah, the latter is not nearly as prominent I don't even think it was ever released digitally or anything like that. It was
No,
CD
it wasn't.
only.
CD only, 250,000 copies, my research tells me. But there you have it. That's Song of the Week, mine.
Beyond the end of time, I will be your love. Promise you'll be mine.
Nice.
All right, who's next?
Gurdip, you want to take yours?
Sure. So my song of the week was given to me by Justin
Joe Buck Roberts, and I actually have a
Joe Buck.
Yeah, I have. He actually had a little blurb with his, and he says, one of the many Chuck Berry covers Elvis did over the years. It's been covered by so many folks in many genres, and I've always heard it as an ever so subtle celebration of / tribute to men of color. We don't know what color the men's skins are, but Berry was a very intentional songwriter, and these are brown-eyed men for a reason, end quote. So something to chew on while Gurdip talks.
I myself, I'm a brown-eyed man. I don't know what the handsome part, but I'll just leave that up to my wife to tell me. Brown-eyed handsome man, 1956.
Oh, I like that Marbella Venus with a wonderful gal. Well, my old Venus was a beautiful lass. She had the world in the palm of her hand. She lost both her arms and had a wrestling match to meet a brown-eyed handsome man. She fought and won herself a brown-eyed handsome man. 1, 2, the count. Nobody. Let's see. 2, 3, the count. Nobody only hit a high fly into the stand. Around the curve, he was headed for home. It was a brown-eyed handsome man.
The song was written by Mr. Rock and Roll himself, Chuck Berry. And as Justin pointed out, as Joe said, it's been said that this is Berry's commentary on race, as the brown-eyed handsome man is like a code for minorities. So Berry apparently wrote this when he witnessed a Hispanic man being arrested for loitering. And there was girls around there screaming at the police to let him go. The verse that inspired this goes like this. Arrested on charges of unemployment, he was sitting in the witness stand. The judge's wife called the district attorney, said, "Free that brown-eyed." Now, listen to Berry's version. You can't really say he's following that typical formula that Justin makes fun of, where all his songs sound the same. This is different. And I think the song is great. Like, musically, it's nothing really spectacular, although Chuck's guitar picking is on point and the piano is also on fire. I think the main selling point of this track, at least to me, are the lyrics. The wordplay is so fun. It's so out there, which attracted a lot of listeners, including Elvis. My personal favorite is Marlo Venus was a beautiful lass. She had the world in the palm of her hand. She lost both her arms in a wrestling match to meet a brown-eyed handsome man. She fought and won herself a brown-eyed handsome man. Obviously, he's talking about the Greek statue Venus de Milo, but I like that he just calls her Marlo. What do you guys think of this song? Justin, what do you think of this?
I adore Chuck Berry's original version of Brown Eyed Handsome Man, and it
and he's not following his formula, right?
No. And what I love about it too is, as you were mentioning, that it's both tongue in cheek and yet there is like commentary in there, you know.
It is, yeah.
And you know that's the brilliance of Chuck Berry, is that lyrically he could add, you know, those extra layers and just sort of like slide them in there underneath, and some of the allusions, you know, you get that last verse, you know, the 2-3, the count with nobody on, high fly into the stand, you know, you can't help but think that he's, you know, talking about Jackie Robinson, or somebody like that,
Yes, for sure. And he got so many words into this short song because it's only 2 minutes and 13
It's
seconds.
very dense, lyrically dense.
He packed a lot. Beck, what do you think of this?
I think lyrically it's very clever. In fact, I think it's a really clever song. But I don't know if you'll throw me off the show for saying that I actually think Chuck Berry's performance of it is quite underwhelming. I actually really like Buddy Holly's version of it.
No, I'm not gonna. I have no qualms against that because some of Berry's vocal stylings may not be for everyone. So yeah. I can respect that. So this was released in September of '56 as the B-side to Too Much Monkey Business, which is crazy because he was firing on all cylinders. If this was the B-side, so I mean, I'd say he was firing on all cylinders like Elvis at this time. So I mean, that's crazy. So the song was also one of the many songs sung during the Million Dollar Quartet as it came to be known. The jam session on December 4th, 1956 at the Memphis Recording Service. Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins are so enamored by the song that they keep going back to it. I think they do it 3 times.
Yeah, 3.
Jerry starts off by doing a little of Too Much Monkey Business, and Carl says he likes Brown Eyed Handsome Man, and Elvis just jumps in, and he just starts singing it.
Well, I like that. I like to hear him sing it. Brown Eyed Handsome Man.
Yeah.
Flying across the desert in the TWA. It's all woman walking across the sand. Ran for 30 miles on the route to Bombay to find a brown-eyed handsome man, just like your daddy. He's a brown-eyed handsome man. I like that where there's 2 men out in the bottom of the third or something. Yeah, like that. Hit a homer right into the
3
stand.
men on and 2 men on and something.
Which means obviously he was very familiar with the single, and he's pretty good at remembering the lyrics. I think that's been said about Elvis before. His ability to recall lyrics was exceptional. Obviously, this didn't happen in the 70s when he was trying to remember Burning Love, but that's a different Elvis. Jerry asks Elvis about Too Much Monkey Business, to which Elvis says, it's all right, but he prefers and likes Brown Eyed more, which is funny because he would go on to cover Too Much Monkey Business, but not Brown Eyed Handsome Man. I like that they keep going back to it because the lyrics are so infectious. And when they don't even get all the lyrics down, they just push through and seem to be having a great time, lots of laughter, and they go on to compliment Chuck Berry. They talk about how much of a great dude he is. Carl says, "Too bad they didn't know the real Chuck Berry."
Yeah.
What do you guys think about Brown Eyed Handsome Man, Beck?
Yeah, it's definitely one of the highlights on the Million Dollar Quartet for me. I love how they keep going back to it. And as you said, they're just having so much fun with it as well, and clearly enjoying the lyrics, which are very, very clever. Justin?
What I love about the Million Dollar Quartet versions of this is Elvis's rhythm guitar playing is really excellent here. It's very noticeable, very prominent, and you can tell that he's just dives right into, picking into the verses, and as soon as somebody else prompts a line from the song, he's right there and ready to go.
He's on it.
Yeah, he's on it. He doesn't need to know what key it's in. He knows.
Yeah.
Arrested on the charges of unemployment, he was seated in the witness stand. Yeah. The judge's wife told up the district attorney, said to free that brown-eyed man. Won't you Johnny I like the way he said it, flying across the desert in the TWA. Walking across the sand, walking 30 miles en route to Bombay to meet a brown-eyed handsome man. Her destination was a brown-eyed handsome man.
Do you know what? I actually, it's a shame that he didn't record this because I actually would have loved to have seen what he could do with it.
Well, he was supposed to, and you're going to talk about that. Gurdip, right?
No, I wasn't. I probably totally missed it. Was that the one where the driver got hit?
Yes, 1967. Okay. Yeah, he was supposed to.
Why don't you talk about it right now?
Yeah. I mean, basically, and we've mentioned there were a handful of songs that Elvis was supposed to record at this session in August 1967, and among those songs that were supposed to be there, including weirdly several years before he actually did do it on stage, The Wonder of You. But Brown Eyed Handsome Man was among the songs that were set to be recorded. And Billy Strange had even made up arrangements for the band for Brown Eyed Handsome Man, but they were canceled as one of Elvis's drivers had accidentally killed a gardener. So Colonel Parker, basically flew Elvis out to Vegas to keep him away from any negative media attention. So Elvis never went back and turned it in the studio, but we missed out just narrowly on a studio version of Brown Eyed Handsome Man from '67.
What's ironic was the gardener was a brown-eyed handsome man. Was that too dark?
It was a little darker, dude.
So this song was covered many times, a bunch of times. So I'll just touch on a few because there's a lot. First up, as Beck pointed out, we got Buddy Holly from 1957.
Way back in 53,000 back ever since the world began. There's been a whole lot of good women, shedding tears among a brown-eyed handsome man. A lot of trouble was a brown-eyed handsome man.
This didn't come out till after his death in '63, and his version is interesting. I think Holly excels at his own songs more than covers, but it has its charm, and the guitar work is great. Vocally, Buddy doesn't do too much different than Barry, I think. It's pretty much a straight cover. What do you guys think? Beck, what do you think? You said you like this more than Chuck's.
Yeah, I love the pace of it, and I just feel like his voice has more kind of rhythmic shape to it as well. And I'm just quite partial to Buddy Holly anyway.
Right. Justin, you're kind of like me. I think you said Holly kind of excels at his own stuff more. Mm-hmm. What do you think about his cover here?
Same. I think he turns in an all right, version of it, but definitely prefer Chuck's original.
This actually hit number 3 on the UK charts, and it was released on the Reminiscing compilation album. Next up, we got Johnny Rivers. He recorded a live version in '64 at the Whiskey A Go-Go, which was like a nightclub in West Hollywood. It was like the in thing. I don't mind it. It's okay. The live crowd, though, they add a lot to the overall sound. Like, we have girls chiming in and providing Rivers some backup, which is kind of neat.
Venus was a beautiful lass. She had the world in the palm of her hand. She lost both her arms in a wrestling match. I beat a brown-eyed man. A lot of trouble with a brown-eyed handsome man. Well, way back in history, 3,000 years, ever since the world began, there's been a whole lot of good women shedding tears over a brown-eyed handsome man. A lot of trouble with a brown-eyed handsome man.
It's fun. It's just something like this would have been great to see live, so you guys should check that version out for sure. Waylon Jennings recorded a version in '69, and this one is much more country and adds a harmonica, which I usually love, but I don't know about this version. It's fine, but I always heard this as a rock song rather than country. This sounds like something I would hear out of like Dukes of Hazzard or something like that.
Way back in history, 3,000 years, back ever since the world began, been a whole lot of good women shed a tear for a brown-eyed handsome man. That's what the trouble was, a brown-eyed handsome man.
It just has that overall sound. This hit number 3 though on the country charts, and actually number 1 on the Canadian country charts. Justin, did you hear this version?
Yeah, I don't mind it. It's okay. It's still, to me, Chuck's got the version. So
Right. Next we have Jerry Lee Lewis, who goes back to record the song in 1970 for the She Even Woke Me Up to Say Goodbye album. It's not bad, heavy on the piano as we would expect. Jerry doesn't add too much to it, but it's nice to hear him cover the song properly, as he seemed to enjoy it so much in '56. The piano break is also nice.
My love
Finally, to round out the Million Dollar Quartet, we have Johnny Cash and Carl Perkins from 2003's Unearth, which was a posthumous album. And this was recorded in the 90s with Rick Rubin. It's okay. But the problem for me is both Carl and Johnny, they sound old.
Yeah, they're showing their age, yeah. Especially Carl. Cash is all right, but, yeah.
I mean, Cash kind of sounds old, too.
Arrested on charges of unemployment, he was sitting in the witness stand. The judge's wife looked at the district attorney, said to free that brown-eyed man. You want your job, you better free that brown-eyed man.
Hey, flying across the desert in a TWA, I saw a woman walking across the sand. She'd been walking 30 miles in a rooftop bar, paid to meet a brown-eyed handsome man. Her destination was the brown-eyed handsome man.
It's fine listening to this as a nostalgia thing. Otherwise, they're really not adding too much. It's like, hey, Johnny and Carl are doing Brown-Eyed Handsome Man in the 90s. Cool. Let's listen. The guitar work is pretty good, though. But yeah, that was my song of the week, Brown-Eyed Handsome Man, the Gurdip Lidar story.
Nice.
Go on.
I will say, I'm also brown-eyed.
There you go.
Me too.
Yeah.
We're all brown-eyed.
There you go.
Yeah.
We're all three of
of
us are brown-eyed handsome people.
2, 3 to count, 3 men on, he hit a high fly in the stand. Around 2:30 was a headed for home. It was a brown-eyed handsome man. That was a game of a brown-eyed handsome man. Good. Lost both of our arms. How about too much monkey business? You have to get on in. It's all right, but I like this one. I like this one better.
Oh, that man, that sounds fine. Oh, that's brown-eyed handsome. Hey,
I'll tell you what I like.
All right. Lastly, from Olivia, she suggested Tomorrow Night.
Tomorrow night, will you remember what you said tonight? To my room tonight, will all the thrills be gone? Tomorrow night.
This was written by Sam Koslow and Wilhelm Grosz. Now, Gurdip, you've actually recently mentioned Will Grosz in reference to another song that he wrote, Harbor Lights.
Oh,
he was
yeah.
And you actually mentioned that he went under various pseudonyms as a songwriter, and that was the case here as well. He's often credited as Hugh Williams on this, and I actually did a little digging on these two songwriters to dig a little more. Sam Koslow was the lyricist. He was from New York City, but he moved out to Hollywood in the 1920s to begin a songwriting career for feature films at Paramount Studios. And then he ended up being let go unexpectedly in the spring of 1939. And so, feeling sort of disgruntled with Hollywood and not really in the mood to be writing songs, he decided to take a vacation back out to New York, and after about the first month off, he started to feel like, hey, things are okay, things are going to be all right. I'm going to start writing songs again. And so by way of a friend, he was introduced to Will Grosz, who he had never met before, but he actually talks about in his autobiography, Cocktails for Two, so named after one of the other songs that he wrote called Cocktails for Two, that they met up and basically, quote, he played a couple new tunes for me. I loved them. The first one I wrote up, I called Tomorrow Night, and I immediately felt that I had another hit on my hands. I brought Grosz over to play it for Harry Link, and Harry repeated the same performance. 30 days of network promotion, and Tomorrow Night was on the top of the chart. The song, which became one of my top standards, was successfully revived twice by Elvis Presley and by Charlie Rich. We returned home to California, and I felt that in my few months in New York had been most productive. I had had 3 hits in that short space of time and had restored my confidence and provided a much-needed lift to my bruised morale. So it came at a point in his career where he needed a little confidence boost, and this song, being a hit, ended up being a good thing for him.
remember what you said to me tomorrow night? Will all the thrill be gone tomorrow night?
Sadly, this was one of the last songs that Wilhelm Grosz wrote. He was born in Austria in 1894, studied music theory and composition, and became an accomplished conductor and composer, but he ended up fleeing the Nazis in 1934, first to England with his family, and there he collaborated with Jimmy Kennedy on a lot of songs, including Harbor Lights, which, as I mentioned, Elvis obviously covered and been done by a lot of different artists. But then he ended up traveling to the United States in 1938, and he ended up stuck in America because of basically a ban on travel. He wasn't allowed to go back overseas, even though he and his wife were in America and their children were in Europe. And the stress of being away from his children and being forced to stay in a country that wasn't his own led to him suffering a heart attack at age 45 on December 10th, 1939. So basically, a few months after writing this song, he passed away from a stress-related heart attack.
Crazy.
Which gives the song, this very it has this very melancholy, somber mood to it. It was first recorded and released August that year, August 1939, by Henry Russell and his Romancers, and then subsequently also by Ozzie Nelson and his orchestra, famously the father of Ricky Nelson and TV star in his own right.
Tonight your lips are tender, your heart is beating fast. You willingly surrender, but darling, will it last? Tomorrow night, will you be with me when the moon is bright? And will you say the things you said tonight?
And then it was covered by a number of other acts, but those first few early ones obviously were a hit, successful enough, but pretty laid-back arrangements. It wasn't really bluesy. It's romantic, but it's not really what I would consider like a super standout. Like, it just feels very much of its era. Like, it's a nice 30s ballad. But then it was revived in 1948 by blues singer Lonnie Johnson, which is almost certainly the version that Elvis is pulling from. And his version is acoustic, and he's got this very mournful vocal delivery. I don't know if either of you two have heard Lonnie Johnson's version. Gurdip, have you heard Lonnie's original?
Yes, I've totally heard this. I love Johnson's vocals on this. And I think you're 100% right when you said Elvis was pulling from this version, because I can hear it vividly. You'd have to be, deaf not to hear Elvis pulling from this. It's excellent vocals by Johnson. I got to listen to more stuff by Johnson, because vocally, I think he's great.
Yeah.
Tomorrow night, will you remember what you said tonight? Tomorrow night, will all the thrills be gone? Tomorrow night, will it be just another memory?
Or just another lovely soul that's in my poor heart to linger on.
Same year, Patti Page had a competing pop version. Was not doing the thing where she was capitalizing on Lonnie Johnson's version. It just happened to be two artists doing it around the same time. And then it disappeared for a few more years until Laverne Baker and the Gliders did a version in 1954. This was actually the B-side of Tweedledee, which I had picked earlier this year as a Song of the Week. We can safely assume from the fact that it was the B-side that Elvis was probably aware of her version as well, even though he doesn't pull from her version, but hers goes far more jazzy. It sounds basically nothing at all like any other version of this song that I've heard. But I really, obviously, love her vocal performance on this. She really digs into it. There's an aspect of doo-wop to it. She's being backed up by the Gliders, and of course, tying into an episode we did last year, the Gliders had Jimmy Breedlove, who did demo recordings for Elvis later on. So he's singing on background on this. But I love Laverne Baker's, and Gurdip, I know you're familiar with Laverne's version of it.
Oh, this is so good. I love her version. Even though I heard Elvis's first, when I first heard this, which was probably in the 90s, I was like, wow, this lady I need more songs of. And it's just vocally, she's like, I haven't really heard a bad Laverne Baker song yet that came from the 50s. It's hard, but yeah, she's so good.
Your lips are so tender. Your heart is beating fast, and you willingly surrender. Tell me, darling, will it last tomorrow night?
Totally. And then we get to Elvis's version, which was recorded in mid-September 1954 at Sun Studio, Memphis, Tennessee. From documentation at RCA, we know that there were 7 takes, although only the master is available. However, the song remained unreleased until 1965. Now, I want to talk about the Sun Records version. Beck, what do you think about the original unaltered recording of Tomorrow Night?
Well, I am a purist in this respect. I much prefer the original one. It's so atmospheric, and it's actually quite reminiscent of Blue Moon.
Yes.
Because there's just so much echo. But I also like this song when I think about it in context of the whole recording session as well, because as I understand it, Sam was just letting Elvis do his thing. He wasn't really a big fan of this song or this recording. I guess I like this song also because it just makes me think about that whole session in its entirety.
Yeah, it was definitely that, letting Elvis work through what he needed to work through to get to what Sam felt was the strongest material, which would be, that rhythm and blues or early rock and roll that he knew that Elvis had in him. Gurdip, what do you think of the original unaltered version of Tomorrow Night?
Yeah, I think I prefer this version more than the 60s one. Those vocals, like Beck said, it harkens back to Blue Moon, and we get those haunting vocals. The atmosphere, he sets the scene, and I love that when he starts, having fun with it. He gets a bit loose when he's talking about, you're willing to surrender. Tell me, darling, will it last? That part, that hits my sweet spot.
Yeah,
that's my favorite part.
No, and what I personally have always loved about Elvis's version of Tomorrow Night, which I first heard on the complete Sun Sessions 2 LP set from the 80s. It's where I first heard this.
87, I think.
Yeah.
Although, wasn't this first on Reconsider Baby?
Yes, from 80, was that 4 or 5? Something like that?
Yeah, 85-ish, I think. Yeah, although I didn't hear it on that. I heard it like you on the Sun Sessions one.
Yeah. But that was where I first heard it. I loved that it was this very tender vocal ballad, and it's very sparse arrangement-wise. Elvis finds a mood that is very unique and very different from a lot of the other versions that were out there. Although, he is pulling from Lonnie Johnson's, but it doesn't have that same level of bluesiness to it. That straightforward, that pulling on those strings of, will you remember what you said tonight? This one, Elvis's, is more hopeful. It's the young person falling in love for the first time and wondering, like, oh yeah, we're getting hot and heavy tonight, but is this going to continue to be a thing? It's more that, but it being Elvis, it's a sweetness to it.
Your lips are so tender. Your heart is beating fast, and you're willing to surrender. Tell me, darling, will it last tomorrow Will you be with me when the moon's bright?
And then, obviously, as we were alluding to, came back around 1965. RCA came up with this concept album marking the 10th anniversary of Elvis on RCA, or of him being signed to RCA. And they wanted to put together this compilation of previously unreleased cuts. And this became the album Elvis for Everyone. And scraping the archives for various recordings, they came across Tomorrow Night. But Elvis, obviously on Tomorrow Night, in 1954 sounds very different from all the other songs that they used on that album, the earliest of which otherwise comes from 57. So what they decided to do was they brought in producer Chet Atkins to oversee a session on March 18th, 1965, to slow the tape down by 8%, which also pitched down Elvis's voice to make him sound a little bit older. And they added overdubbed guitars, drums, bass, harmonica, and the Anita Kerr singers on backup, sort of adding a doo-wop-esque-ish backing vocal sound to it. And yeah, what do you guys think of this? I mean, obviously, we all prefer the original, but I think this one is an interesting experiment. You know, they tried to do something that had a more contemporary 60s Nashville style. What do you think, Gurdip?
I don't mind the overdubs. They're okay, but the Anita Kerr singers, man, they just seem like tacked on. They don't really go with them at all, I think.
I think it would be stronger if they were not on there.
Yeah, if they had just done the overdubs. Yeah.
Stronger is maybe a strong word. Cohesive. Like, they really stick out.
Well, why didn't they just get the Jordanaires?
It might have just been an availability thing.
I think if they had added the Jordanaires, I think it would have been a bit more pleasant to the ears, and because we're used to hearing Jordanaires backing Elvis.
Right.
So these, I don't know, the Anita Kerr singers, it's too jarring to me. It just doesn't feel seamless.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, I agree, Gurdip. I'm not a big fan of this one, Justin, because it just feels a bit too manufactured for me. And the question I would ask is, why? Why did they do? Did they do this?
Yeah, I mean, really, that's what it comes down to: is that it was a recording that they still had in the archives. They were scraping the bottom of the barrel, and I mean, obviously, Elvis, sounded like a squeaky voiced teenager on the original. In terms of, by comparison to what he was recording in the studio in 1964, 1965, I can see their logic. I don't agree with it, but I see the logic.
Yeah. Okay.
It strikes me as hilarious that it's sort of an inversion of what they did that same year for the Girl Happy soundtrack, where they've pitched him up ever so slightly to make him sound younger. So,
Your lips are so tender. Your heart is beating fast. And you're willing to surrender. Tell me, darling, will it last tomorrow? Will you be with me when the moon's bright?
I like to know all those Puritans who say that Elvis's song shouldn't be remixed and overdubbed. Think about this, because this was being done in '65.
Yeah, so true.
What are their opinions on this?
Yeah. I mean, and it slid out. Like, it got Colonel Parker's approval, and technically Elvis had to have put a stamp on it from a business perspective. He certainly didn't prevent it from coming out.
In '65, would he have made a fuss?
He wouldn't have cared. No, he didn't really care. But yeah, the album itself didn't really even do that well, though. Relatively speaking, for an Elvis release, it still sold like 300,000 copies at the time, which for anybody else is a hit. But for Elvis, it was a disappointment. Peaked at number 10 on the album's chart, and that was pretty much all that was heard of Tomorrow Night until, as mentioned earlier, the original master, an edited version of the original master, came out on Reconsider Baby. And then the Complete Sun Sessions, and subsequently a number of other compilations relating to Elvis's 50s recordings. King of the Rock and Roll 50s Master Set, Elvis at Sun, Sunrise, and A Boy from Tupelo. Charlie Rich did a version in the 70s. Actually, it was 65 for the album That's Rich, and then was reissued in 73 on a compilation album called Tomorrow Night, which was basically thrown together by RCA to capitalize on the fact that Charlie Rich was having success on another record label with the song Behind Closed Doors. Like, it was one of those, like, you left us, but we're going to use your old recordings to compete with you.
Ah, the Sam Phillips method.
It was one of those situations, yeah.
Tomorrow night, will you remember what you said tonight? Tomorrow night, will all the thrills be gone?
So yeah, and then Bob Dylan did a version in 1992 on his album Good As I've Been to You, very much influenced similarly to Elvis's by the Lonnie Johnson version. And honestly, I gotta give credit to Bob Dylan. Like, some people aren't the biggest fan of his singing voice, and myself included, but he's actually pretty good on this one. I really enjoyed his version of this. It's a nice acoustic version.
Your lips are so tender, your heart is beating fast, and you willingly surrender to me, but darling, will it last tomorrow night?
And then lastly, 2006, Raul Malo of the Mavericks did a version on his solo album, You're Only Lonely. And honestly, we all know, like, Gurdip and I love Raul Malo and his voice in terms of his influence from Elvis and just straight up, like, fantastic vocals. But I get the sense, listening to this arrangement, it almost feels more influenced by Elvis's 60s version, just the way the instrumentation is arranged. And we know that Raul Malo is a huge Elvis fan. I'm sure he's familiar with both versions, and maybe it's just coincidence that it kind of has that vibe, but it definitely sounds to me like he's pulling maybe more from the 60s arrangement, than the 50s one.
Yeah, he's not doing that tender vocal
that
we get from 54. So maybe he had that Elvis for Everyone album.
Could be.
This is how I'm doing it.
And you willingly surrender to me, but darling, will it last tomorrow night? Will you be with me when the moon is bright?
But yeah, I just wanted to tell the story of the two songwriters because it turned out to be one of the last two songs that one of the songwriters wrote. And it just has a very poignant, melody to it. And yeah, so that's my song of the week, Tomorrow Night.
Nice.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thank you, Beck, Gurdip. It's good to be back, and thank you to our patrons, especially for voting and selecting the main topic and our songs of the week this week.
Yes, for sure. Beck, thanks again. You're coming back. You're almost a regular now. What's going on?
Always good to be on the show, and I'm happy to come back anytime you ask me, guys. You know that.
Of course.
Awesome, for sure. And if people want to comment on our main topic, which was Elvis on Tour, or our 3 songs of the week, Justin, how can they do that?
Yeah, tcbcast@gmail.com, or of course we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And if you want to be one of the few to pick our songs of the week, how can they do that and get extra content? Is that possible? How can they do that?
Yeah, patreon.com/TCBcast, and you get all sorts of access to extra little goodies, and on certain tiers you can even submit songs like some of our patrons did, and on all tiers you can vote on songs for Songs of the Week.
Excellent. And this is a big topic, but I think we covered it fairly well. There's not a lot more of these big concerts left for us to cover, is there, Justin? We've kind of tackled them all now, no?
Elvis in concert?
Yeah, that's pretty much it, I think. But, I'm sure we can find more topics to cover, but, that's how we do. Anyway, as Elvis said on the film we just watched,
It's a hot time in Florida.
Boy, it is. Thank goodness.
A rainy night in Georgia.
You've been listening to the TCBcast, an unofficial Elvis fan podcast.
Someone must have stomped on his head with those blue suede shoes.
Thank you and good night.